Sunday, April 19th, 2020. This is Darren Marchant for American Nomad News. It's amazingly quiet around here. The police station does get regular visitors, but they never seem to be too thrilled with life. It's kind of funny how certain organizations just kind of have that feature. It's not too common that people who normally don't visit the police station are not having a good day when they show up at the police station. It makes me wonder about what that's like for the people who have to work in such organizations, to constantly be exposed to people who are unhappy with their lives, unhappy with the moment, unhappy with the police. It must be kind of surreal. And I imagine, if you think about it logically, that psychologically, it calluses them against that sort of behavior, toughens them against it. And then you look at, okay, so if people under stress, when they meet people who are constantly seeing people under stress and are calloused to it, what is their impression of that person? We only really see this if we look from the outside, and we look at it in a long-term perspective. Let's stretch this out a little bit and look at long-term mass society psychological issues. What happens when you have large tragedies that happen in the world? From the Irish famine, which lasted a really long time and was incredibly impactful on people's lives. The post-traumatic stress disorder that we can assume was common at the time was not diagnosed, not treated, not even really acknowledged by a lot of people. COVID-19 is going to create these kinds of effects. A lot of people are going through their lives largely unaffected. They've been told they can't go to the restaurants, they can't go here, they can't go there. And so their lives are sealed away from this incredible difficulty that others are experiencing. This can give them a sense that it's not real, that it's not personal, even that it's fake. Then you look at what it is like for someone who works in the computer industry. And every day, they wake up in their small apartment with the small social circle they actually physically contact. Perhaps the people they know and flirt with down at the coffee shop, the guy at the cigarette store, gas station attendant that usually ignores them and don't really know them, one or two roommates, girlfriend, a dog, and their boss at work, and a few other people. They go to work. Most of the people at work are busy working, and they socialize a little, but mostly they get to work. And then you have that wall between them and their customer base, the people they depend on for their check. We can extrapolate that a lot of things are going on that we will not see unless we look from an outside perspective, from a long-term perspective, and from a mass psychological perspective. It's easier to acknowledge things on a personal perspective, on a short-term perspective, on an acute perspective. the chronic perspective, the wide perspective, this is harder for us to acknowledge. How do we get a view outside of our own relatively simple perspective? We can take a look at the world like Einstein said in a thought experiment. We can do this by acknowledging one perspective or another, and then both. How do we come to understand what's truly going on when we refuse to put ourselves outside of our own perspective? What is important in the world? What is important to me and what is important to another person may seem significantly different. But on the day when you show up in court, it's kind of lonely. It's kind of strange. And you're kind of new to it. But the guy behind the desk, the gal that takes your paperwork, the police officer at the metal detector, for them, it's a completely normal day. Everything's fine. It's slightly annoying when some people, like perhaps yourself, are grumpy, are unhappy with them, are impatient, are acting strangely, which is normal for them. Strangely for the person acting strangely because it's an unusual day for the person who doesn't normally go. And it is a normal day for the person who's normally in a place and in a station in society where people go when it's an unusual day. In the hospital, in the police station, in the courthouse, the wedding chapel. I've had these days. But how do we factor it in when hundreds of thousands of people are experiencing days all of a sudden that are very much outside of their normal? How do we understand? And how do we take that perspective and apply it to spaceflight and to the management and population, the occupation of deep space? How do we benefit? How do we take lessons from these things? Perhaps it's important to realize a few things. The story of Babel in the Bible is not over yet. It's actually coming to an end. We're having a global discussion on the nature of a pandemic. We're having global discussions on many other subjects, many other topics at the same time. It's incredibly important, and yet we're having a hard time communicating, in large part because our languages are so different. So many people in Italy are suffering and having difficulty. And yet, their primary language is Italian, not English, not Chinese. There's a significant number of people in China who are having a really rough time. And not just with COVID, but with many other aspects of life that outside of COVID are normal for them and difficult. How do we as a society get to a point where we're speaking the same language and have the ability to understand each other and to respect the similarities, differences, and contexts important to get the job done, whatever that job is of that day. Let's not let the tragedy and difficulty of episodes like COVID stop us from learning and benefiting from the things that happen in our lives. Not to ignore the negative aspects and not to disrespect them, but to not let them go to waste either. That it's incredibly important that while this is going on, we realize just how disconnected we are from family, how divided we are by language, and how our cultural understandings sometimes create confusion. Physicists like Einstein were looking for grand unification, but they were looking at it from a scientific, mechanical perspective. Perhaps we'll never find that until we, humanity, start to see ourselves as a grand community. There's a formula that I like to think about. And the result is the true wealth of mankind. P for population minus the number of people who can't work a full work week times 40 hours a week times 50 weeks a year. That's the available man hours of mankind. Do that calculation. Write it down on a piece of paper. Decide for yourself what you think X is, the number of people who can't do a full work week. Perhaps a certain category of people of a certain age could only be counted as half of that. So X for that factor would be minus 0.5 for that individual. You figure out the answer for negative X. You figure out the answer for P for population. Right now it's about 7.7 billion. Multiply that by 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. That's the wealth of mankind. Write that number down on a piece of paper. Write it down as a whole number. Take a real good look at it. We're very wealthy. Let's not throw that wealth away. Don't reduce population. Prepare for it. This is Darren Marchant for American Nomad News. Good morning.